Good morning. I am here from California, and it's like 6 o'clock my time, so it is great to be here with you on this very, very early morning. So I am going to chat a little bit about disinformation, and my job was to give, in 10 minutes, a prep and overview of what it is, how it's working, and where we are on solutions. So we are just going to talk fast like New Yorkers here. These are not my slides. That's still not my slide. There we go. All right. Here are my slides. All right, so just for the premise of the talk, our political conversations are happening on an infrastructure built for viral advertising. So let's take that as foundational principle number one. Over the last 2 years, what we've done is we've begun to develop a lexicon for thinking about what we call information disorder. The idea that the social platforms allow anybody to reach anybody. This has been great for connecting people. It's been great for growing advocacy movements. It also means that there are ways that people we might not want to be reaching us are also reaching us. So we have a collection of different problems that are all generally affiliated under the bucket of how information is reaching people. And I'm going to talk about the second one, disinformation, which is an intent to influence and intent to deceive. So that's where we tend to, we use intent to really differentiate between misinformation, which is something that's just wrong, and disinformation, which is something that's very much wrong on purpose. So again, another premise I'm going to ask you to assume is true for now, and you can debate me on it during the Q&A. The social platforms evolved in kind of 3 concurrent ways that led to them becoming a prime vector for disinformation. So you had the mass consolidation of audiences onto 6 platforms. You had an ad-based business model that optimized for personal targetability, the platforms knowing as much about you as they possibly can. This makes you targetable for messages by people who want to reach you with a particular point of view. And then gameable algorithms. So the idea that once content hits, velocity and virality engines push it forward in unexpected ways. You can game trending topics. You can potentially also, you see kind of interesting things happening with recommendation engines and ways in which the platforms proactively serve content. So those 3 things together create this information environment that is ripe for manipulation. Dual use technology, the idea being that it's designed for one purpose, but it can be used for malign purposes. Who is using it for malign purposes? All manner of people. So we have state actors, so Russia and Iran are the 2 that you hear the most about. Terrorists, ISIS, domestic ideologue. I went with Pepe here, but you can put a whole bunch of different ones in there at this point. True believers, that's the conspiracy theorist communities. And then spammers, those are the economically motivated folks. And of course, with all of these, the lines are occasionally blurred. But we're going to focus on state actors, because that's what I focus on. And these are a collection of different little birds here, featuring various campaigns. If you look at Oxford Internet Institute, you can read the case studies on state-sponsored disinformation campaigns. I am going to focus on Russia. Apologies, I think the slide used to be black background. Talking about Russia, though, so one of the things that we saw with that was it's kind of our first example of having a massive data set. I did one of the Senate Intelligence Committee reports on Russia. I led a team of 7 people investigating the 400 gigs of material over about 8 months in 2018. And this is, roughly speaking, the kind of operational process that they ran over a period of multiple years, beginning in 2013, to reach out to and propagandize to and involve themselves in American society. So first, they formed distinct groups online in the form of Facebook pages and also in the form of amassing audiences around particularly popular Twitter accounts, not bots, but actual persona accounts. They reinforced in-group identity, so whether you were on the right or the left, or they paid very special attention to the Black community, they created pages that made people feel like they were really part of tribes. They created a media mirage. What we mean by that is they integrated their own propaganda with legitimate propaganda from authentic community media, so authentic right-wing accounts like Turning Point, authentic left-wing accounts like Occupy Democrats and the other 99%. So they worked to integrate themselves into the real media ecosystem so that they were virtually indistinguishable from authentic American hyperpartisan media. Once they had established these these tribes of people and these and integrated into the media environment, they began to propagandize, and each different group received precisely the right propaganda. They used targeting tools to grow audiences and to push those messages to the right groups of people. They developed personal relationships. They actually recruited activists, particularly on the left, and then they activated them for a purpose, meaning they drove people into the streets. They had about 81 real protest events where they got people to rally. They got them to protest Donald Trump. They got them to rally for the Confederate flag. It didn't matter if you were on the left or the right. They did actually achieve getting people out into the streets on both sides there. What is the impact? That's something I think we're going to talk about in the Q&A, but this is a page created by a African-American man, does not appear to be affiliated with the IRA, but it flagged for us because when we were looking for this content as it continued to exist online, this page had actually shared memes from not one but 4 different Internet Research Agency accounts. So here is a person in a targeted community that really found the messages resonant, and that's one of the problems here. Once they create the collateral, it's very much in the world, and at that point it's picked up and it's amplified by real activists, real people who feel a real affinity for the messages. And so when we talk about impact, a lot of the conversation has focused on the election, but this was not an operation that was only focused on the election. This was something that was a very long-term thing to integrate fake accounts, propaganda accounts into American society for long-term effect. So the, sorry, I have a cold today. The power to influence opinions increasingly lies with those who can most widely and effectively disseminate a message. This has been true since before the internet. This is why propaganda works, but this is also very much true in the era of the internet. So as we talk about what is happening and why, this is of course the point. And this is manifesting in the form now of democratized propaganda. Anyone can do what the Internet Research Agency did, and weaponized narratives, meaning that it's not, there are a lot of real underlying grievances in the material that they put out, but ultimately they are able to take those grievances, exploit them, and then push them into the hands of real people, real Americans who go on to amplify them further. Of course, important caveat here, interference is not collusion. This unfortunately got, a lot of what I did got conflated in the media as, I think I'm a Russiagate hoaxer. But the point was never about the collusion, particularly not the research I did. The point was that the interference happened. And as I said at the start of this, many different groups are capable of executing the same types of influence campaigns, which means that we have to understand the interference for what it is, regardless of who is the president or what the outcome was. So I think we're going to talk about solutions. I've got 2.5 minutes now. It is an interesting problem because it's so multifaceted, because again, it's dual-use technology, which means that we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We do want social platforms. We do want freedom of expression online. We do want the ability for activists to coordinate, to amplify messages. And so the question becomes, how do we think about what regulatory options there are? These are 4 that have been floated in Congress, both in the state of California, which is where I live right now, but also federally, looking at all manner of things. Ad transparency, the idea being if you can see who's sending you the messages, you will be able to kind of exercise informed judgment on how seriously you should take them. Bot labeling, that kind of over-indexes on automation in my opinion, but it's a thing that's been tossed around a lot. Antitrust, the idea that, as I mentioned, one of the problems is that mass consolidation of audiences. If you were to break that up, what would happen? The antitrust thing, of course, is not focused on disinformation, but that's my area, so it's one of the things that I think about a lot. And then privacy. Again, what do you do when you have the ability to, if you know less about people, do these operations become less effective? This is my premise again. Disinformation is a cybersecurity problem, not a truth and narrative issue. A lot of what I do intersects with the moderation conversation because it's just a matter of how do we think about what content stays online, what content gets attention online. I tend to think of this as disinformation. Most of what the Russians put out would not have come down under any kind of fact-checking premise. It was designed to be emotionally resonant, not factually accurate. It was not necessarily factually inaccurate, though, and that's one of the problems here. So I tend to think about this mostly as a problem of distribution. How do we think about ways in which content is amplified online? How do we think about ways in which platform algorithms enable this velocity and virality? And might we want to think about looking at dissemination as the thing to go after, the thing to change, so that we don't get bogged down in conversations about censorship or conversations about particular partisan points of view online. I've been advocating for better information sharing, so working with platforms, working with government, creating these sort of centers by which we can communicate information about influence operations as we see them, and then establishing oversight so that the tech industry, which is largely self-regulated right now, has a responsibility, has an accountability. How do we think about creating that accountability? And I think that we'll talk about that in the questions. And I'm only 22 seconds over, so I feel like a rock star. Thanks so much.